So good morning, and just a few announcements. As you've seen, my email was rather long. You can have access temporarily to the recorded presentation. If you send me an email, I can send you the link, because the lady, Sky Fallon, has gone through surgery, and she's going to try to work from her bed to integrate the recorded lectures into the system. As you can understand, we only want to give them to people who have paid for the class. So that's one thing. Other thing too is for the Thursday series, there are some changes in the sequence of the classes. For whatever reason, I had made a mistake. It's all my fault. So the last class in November will be about Germany. And then the last class, you don't have the schedule yet, but the last class in May will drop because of that. So keep an eye on my emails. Try to read them. I would really appreciate that, so I don't have to repeat things all the time. So this is, of course, today an extremely thrilling class about Leonardo, the Renaissance man. So let's look at the first slide, which is going to give you an idea where he stands. So he's very much in the middle here, Leonardo. You see people that are contemporary to him and people that have been of influence on him. Okay, I always leave these two who were so pivotal in the evolution of Renaissance art, Donatello and Masaccio. At the time Leonardo comes on the scene, there are two major workshops when he's really young. It's Fra Filippo Lippi and Antonio del Polaiuolo. But then very quickly after Filippo Lippi dies, then Verrocchio is going to come up and have that other very important workshop in Florence. We saw Sandro Botticelli last time, and I hope that you all have looked at the Botticelli's Inferno. I think it was quite an eye-opener and quite entertaining too. Leonardo was born in 1452 and will go into the workshop of Verrocchio in around 1470. We'll see that in a minute. I put as reference to Ghirlandaio and Michelangelo. As we know, Michelangelo will follow Leonardo. He's almost 20 years younger than Leonardo. And Ghirlandaio is going to open a big workshop too. That's going to be quite influential. Michelangelo will study with him a little bit. But so you have an idea of who the contemporaries are. What I did too is give you the names of the leaders, the Medici family, and have an idea who was who when they were working. And as you can see, the most important for Leonardo will be Lorenzo, with whom he has kind of a mitigated relationship. So I want to give you an idea of the teacher, the works of the teacher of Leonardo, talking about Andrea del Verrocchio. Was born in Florence in 1435, was first apprenticed as a goldsmith, from whom he takes his name, Giuliano Verrocchi, and then probably might have worked in the workshop of Donatello and Desiderio da Settignano too. But he was also trained as a painter under Fra Filippo Lippi. He became member of the Guild of Sculpture in 1469, and in 1472 becomes a member of the Guild of St. Luke that was limited to painters. He opened then a workshop that was very successful in Florence, And if just looking at the names of the apprentices that went through his workshop, you already have an idea. Leonardo da Vinci, Lorenzo de Credi, Domenico Ghirlandaio, Francesco Botticini, Pietro Perugino, Botticelli, Luca Signorelli. Many of these we're going to see in 2 weeks. And then a young Filipino Lippi, when his father had died, then went on with his apprenticeship with Verrocchio. In 1481, he's called to Venice to make the Colleoni equestrian statue. He's going to open a workshop in Venice, and then when he's starting to fade, he will leave that in the hands of Lorenzo di Credi, and he will die in Venice. He's buried, actually his remains were transferred to Florence, where he's buried in St. Ambrose Church. A few of his work, so it's always interesting to see how much influence it has. He did some paintings, the Madonna with seated child, and of course, when I show you paintings, do understand that most of his works have disappeared, as with all other artists. We have figured out that at this time, about 2% of what was done in that period has survived. And so you can imagine how many other works they were dismantled and ended up in different collections or were destroyed. This is another work, and there is some belief that Leonardo might have had his hand at this work, Tobias and the Angel, mostly in the Angel. And then definitely here with the baptism of Christ, you see the figures of the angels here on the side are definitely from the hand of Leonardo. The legend says that at that time, Verrocchio, seeing the talent of Leonardo, decided to put down his brushes and never to paint again and just concentrate on sculpture. He was indeed quite an extraordinary sculptor. Here are a few works, a few of the busts, as we've already seen before with Lorana, as well as Da Settignano. These busts were either sent to the suitor so he could see who was going to marry. Sometimes there are also funerary busts that would be put on the tomb of these young ladies that very often died pretty young. This work has been severely damaged and was repaired by modern restoration. It's really very pretty to see the decoration on the sleeves, and that's something you already see with Francesco Lorana. But look at the delicacy of the hair, the little curls that surround the face. It could be that she was a member of the family of the mercenary Bartolomeo Colleoni, who Verrocchio made the equestrian statue for. But definitely we look back at Desidero da Settignano with the bust of Maria Strozzi, and we can see the legacy, if you want, of Desidero. Another really pretty of the lady with primroses. That's a marble in the Bargello in Florence. As you can see, she's holding some flower against her breast. She's shown to a little longer face, so we can see her waist. But also there is these absolutely wonderful hands that we can find with Botticelli, and sometimes we'll see them too with Leonardo. Lucrezia Donati, who probably was the sitter, was one of the mistresses of the Medici. probably of Lorenzo the Magnificent. The Putto with dolphin is was part of a fountain. It can be seen from different points of view. And this is literally the resuscitation of the ancient fountain with water coming out of the mouth of the dolphin. And the famous, because that one is probably his most famous, most known work, is the Young David. And right away, when you see the Young David, you think also of Donatello's work. It actually was commissioned by the Medici family, who sold it actually in 1476 to the Signoria, which was the government of Florence, and was placed in the Palazzo Vecchio. So this really drew a lot of comparison with the Donatello's David that I put side by side. And I think it's really interesting to see the differences. Of course, the obvious one is that the Verrocchio statue is dressed. Also, there is a big difference in the patina, and the patina of the Verrocchio piece is absolutely superb and must have been greatly admired by people that were looking at it. There is also less innuendo on the femininity, if you want, of David, and of course nothing to do with the hero himself, but more with the sexuality of Donatello versus Verrocchio. The Donatello David is very effeminate, and then we have that very known feather that caresses the inner thigh that is an immediate signal to where he was from. Verrocchio's David is carrying a weapon, a little sword, and looks quite triumphant when you look, whereas Donatello's David is much more thinking. Here are the two faces, and you can really appreciate the beauty of the both versions. Here is the back of Verrocchio's and Donatello. You can see much more of an accentuated contrapposto with Donatello, whereas a more firm stand for Verrocchio's. Other bust by Verrocchio, the Giuliano di Piero de' Medici. This is a terracotta. And then a couple of statues, a group of statues that were to replace the St. Louis of Toulouse that used to occupy that niche, the St. Louis of Toulouse by Donatello that had been transferred to Santa Croce. So here we have a very interesting grouping of Christ and Doubting Thomas. It's also interesting that he kept the back of the statues are not finished, they're hollow. These were, with the very heavy folds of the clothing, it probably was extremely heavy. And so here is the beautiful, and again, an extraordinary patina for the way it's typical when you use bronze, you can finish it with a different patina. That's really the choice. You have Christ with his upraised hand, very traditional, and showing his wound where Thomas is going to put his fingers. Very beautiful interest in the physiognomy and also the very expressive drapery. This is the Orsanmichele with all the niches. Actually, when you go to Florence, what you see now are copies, and the originals are inside the church. An ideal portrait of Alexander the Great, made in 1480s. And the very famous bust of Lorenzo de' Medici. incredible rendering of that very brilliant and ruthless head of that leader of the banking family at the time. Though when you look at the way he's dressed, he doesn't have a crown or any sign of royalty. He wasn't, but he's actually wearing the simple and very distinctively Florentine costume with the padded and draped headdress. Another of the Medici family, Piero de' Medici, much younger, of course. And then finally, the famous equestrian statue of Corleone, for which he was called to Venice. He actually participated into a contest. There were 3 people that applied, and he got the job, mostly because of the way he had prepared the project. The Condottiero Corleone was a former captain general of the Republic of Venice in 1475. He died, and in his will left a substantial part of his estate to the Republic under the condition that the statue of himself should be commissioned and set up in the Piazza San Marco. Fortunately for the Venetian, that the square, there was an edict that no statue could be ever erected on the square, and so they decided to move it to the Campo di Santi Giovanni e Paolo on the side of the famous church, and this is where it stands. But you can see the beautiful finish of the harness and all the hair of the horse, the incredible face of the Condottiero, though it is not a portrait. The Condottiero had died prior to Verrocchio going to Venice. And so he's more kind of a representation of a fierce warrior. When Verrocchio made the statue, the biggest difficulty for him was to assure the balance of the horse. And whereas Donatello had found a way to have the horse on 3 paws, he was resting the 4th one on a globe, which assured the better balance of the rather heavy monument. So here, Verrocchio is the first one, who is actually going to be able to balance the statue on 3 feet, 3 legs. So from Verrocchio, Leonardo is going to learn painting, as we know, and a little bit about sculpting too, though mostly it's going to be painting. So let's look at Leonardo. We have there the portrait that we're going to discuss later on. He was born in Vinci, near Florence. He was an illegitimate child. And took as name, as last name, Vinci, which was the town where he was born. He was born in 1452. His father was an important figure in the little town. His mother, we're not sure who she was, probably a servant or a peasant around. In 1466, he entered the workshop of Verrocchio. 1472, he joined the Painters Guild of Florence. He became an independent master in 1478 and immediately tried to open a workshop, though he was known to have some problem in gathering his students, his assistant, because he insisted to have very handsome young men around him, more than talented. This is going to bring him into trouble. He had twice trouble with the law because he was accused of homosexuality, which is really an important thing. We've already seen it with Botticelli. Homosexuality was thanks to the Medici, tolerated around them, but legally the church was completely forbidding it. And if found, they could go to prison, or they, if it was really bad, they could actually be executed for being homosexual. There are a lot of things that have been written about Leonardo, who was definitely of that board, though not uniquely. Apparently, he might have been both sides, but mostly gay. And he was accused in 1478 to have had some relationship with a known man prostitute, and he had been denunciated. That was something that happened often at that time. There was denunciation. There was a particular box where people could drop some denunciation, and he's denunciated at the same time as 3 other people with the same prostitute. Most probably he was arrested, because we have some in his famous papers, some proof that he had invented a system how to force open the grids that were closing the windows of his cell. So this is a supposition, though we have no documents that ensures that he actually was incarcerated. There will be another instance later on where he again will be accused of the same whatever event. In 1482, he's going to enter the service of the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. He will leave. Actually, there are a lot of things. We'll talk a little more about it, why he went. So let's go on. He will return to Florence in 1500, when Ludovico is taken to France and where he will die. In 1502, he will enter the service of Cesare Borgia in Rimini. Goes back to Florence in 1503 and helps in the war against Pisa. 1506, he returns to Milan to work for Charles d'Amboise, the French having taken over Milan by that time, and becomes the court painter to Louis XII of France. He settled again in Milan from 1508 to 1513, and left just for 2 years, 1514 to 16, goes to Rome under the patronage of Leo X, and really, by the way, doesn't like Rome at all. He really loved Milan, by the way. In 1516, he will meet with Francis I of France, the King of France, and accepts to move to France, where he will become court painter to Francis, though by that time we know that he had had multiple strokes and was paralyzed from the right side, probably not just the hand, but probably the arm too. And then it is in France that he will die, in Amboise, in the Chateau de Clou. We will see that later on. So let's look at some of the first work that he did. This is a work that he did when he was still in Verrocchio's workshop. Really, we can see the interest in the perspective with that landscape that is already showing some characteristic of Leonardo's style. So look at the angel. The angel is in full profile. The Virgin is stopped in the middle of her reading and reacts to the Annunciation. But really interesting that, as you can see, the hands are very similar to some of the sculpture we see with Verrocchio. But a mistake is that he had to make the arm longer than it should be, just to correspond to the perspective of the whole setting. First drawing by Leonardo, don't have a date, but this shows the Arno Valley. and really part of this landscape that we find in the Virgin of the Rocks and behind the Mona Lisa. So it really shows the interest he had already in these landscapes. He was very sensitive to nature. The first portrait that he did was Ginevra de' Benci. He was, again, still an apprentice to Andrea Verrocchio. The portrait is traditional, but shows already details like the curly hair of Ginevra that only Leonardo could achieve. You can see that very particular work that he has around the head. She was born into a wealthy Florentine family and was married to Luigi Niccolini in 1474 at the age of 16. So it is typically at that time that she would have had the portrait made. At the back of the portrait is the heraldic motif that you can see here, that is painted over kind of a porphyry background. The motto, "Beauty adorns virtue." The painting was at the time cut down. It would have gone to the waist, most probably. But sometimes people, just because they had a frame that was all set or a place where they want to have it, did cut it, or maybe it was damaged. I'd like to compare this with a portrait made by Ghirlandaio, as we've seen, who is more or less a contemporary of Leonardo, where he shows Giovanna Tornabuoni in her magnificent garment, but shown in a more typical way in Italy at the time, which was still the profile, pure profile according to the coins that were found from the Roman time. This was the way portraits were typically made. The Flemish painters brought these three-quarter views that allow people to have a much better sense of the personality of the sitter. So beautiful portrait, very nice description of her costume, beautiful jewelry, and also the kind of symbolism showing a rosary here in coral, made of coral, that would give the attributes to the young lady of her piety and her good nature. A few virgins that he did, this is just at the time he left Verrocchio, known as the Madonna Benoise, by the name of the person who owned the painting for a time. This is an early work. We can see that evolution, that distance taken little by little from Verrocchio. The interesting relationship between the Virgin and Christ, you can see a mother fascinated by what her new child is doing. What is new in this is that stress on the chiaroscuro, that contrast between the light and the dark. Very pretty light. Another of his early Madonna is the Madonna of the Carnation. And it's starting to take its personality. We have these kind of really interesting landscape in the background. Again, this is a feature that was brought by the Flemish painter from the north. She's holding a carnation that the child is trying to reach. And we can see now that compared to the previous painting, we have a much more important spatial arrangement, placing the Virgin quite a bit closer to us with that landscape at the back. This is an unfinished oil draft representing Saint Jerome. this was obviously unfinished. You can see the basic drawing of the lion at the front and the same there. Some of the landscape is done. We're not sure when this was done, but probably around 1480. The panel at the time was cut into 5 pieces before being restored in its original form. Jerome, of course, who was one of the fathers of the church, for a while went into the wilderness as a hermit, actually near Antioch, and produced a translation of the Bible and lived as an ascete at that time. He's shown here as a penitent and not at all as a scholar. There are, again, very obvious evolution in the works of Da Vinci, the composition, for that interesting perspective, the St. Jerome being in the center, but looking up. And so we have the diagonal that leaves the hands and all the way up. And of course, the faithful lion, the story saying that he had met a lion that had a thorn in the leg, in the foot. And then he managed to remove the thorn. And from that time on, the lion became inseparable with Jerome. Among the works I'm showing you, there be a lot of attribution that are not fully accepted by all the scholars, specialists in Leonardo. This is one of them. This is the Madonna Litta. That's the nursing Madonna that is at the Hermitage. And for many scholars, are believed to be made by followers of Leonardo, but we have the same windows as we've seen in previous Madonna and the lovely landscape. Though the way the painting is done is a little too linear, which means the delineation of the face is too stark compared to the background. You don't have that blending that Leonardo was so known for already in his early works. One of the very appreciated work that he left unfinished, Leonardo was known to change his mind. He had started something, and for a reason or another, he wanted to go on with something else, and then he would leave the works unfinished to the wrath of the patrons very often. So this was actually a first major independent commission. The whole idea is that in the early Christian era, the 6th January had been celebrated as the Feast of the Epiphany, which corresponds to the appearance of God amongst men in the form of Jesus Christ. And the mankind is then represented by the 3 Magi who are coming to pay homage to the Messiah. In this painting, we also have the symbolism of the fall of the pagan world that happens at the same time. And this is shown at the back with these, that architecture falling apart at the birth of Jesus. Why did it remain unfinished? It corresponds to the time when Leonardo left Florence to go to Milan. But this is just such an expression of the innovative trend of Leonardo compared to Verrocchio. He's obeying by Alberti's tenets, saying that you have to include as many people as you can, but they all have to have some interaction. And this is very much what he does. Though the Virgin is in the center, that also would have been stressed by Alberti. The little child, Jesus, is trying to touch the gift by one of the Magi. And then you have people looking up, looking around, touching, quite a busy work. But what unifies it is that kind of blending of the painting and what is already known as the sfumato of Leonardo. Though as the painting is not finished, it's difficult to know what is the wear out of the piece that of course had not been varnished and therefore is much more fragile. Interesting to see, showing the sfumato, the way it's spelled, and then look at the project, the way Leonardo prepared the work. And so this is a perspectival study. This gives you a very good idea on all this painting that you see with that apply the perspective, how intricate the preparation was. And here you see all the lines that of course would disappear in the final project. But then the painter had already an idea how to place things in this scale compared from the back to the front and give you a really good idea of the size of all the figures. So why is Leonardo leaving to Milan? A lot of people have asked themselves why. There are different points. The fact is that his relationship with Lorenzo de' Medici wasn't too good because he was a difficult character to deal with. And Lorenzo was quite a supportive artist, but they also had to relate to him the proper way. Quite a trip from Florence to Milan. He's actually going there accompanying the new ambassador from Florence to Milan, who he knew, and has right away, before leaving, he already sent a letter to the dealer, the leader in Milan, and sending him all his qualifications, including the fact that he can build walls, that he has special machines that can help him in defending Milan against attacks from the north or from the west. He also mentioned, and it's very known at the very end of his letter, he said, but by the way, I'm also a painter. He's already had in his mind the idea he wants to build that enormous horse that would magnify the presence of the Sforza. So let's look at the Sforza family. How did they come to become the leader of Milan? The first family that really led Milan was the Visconti, and they ran out of male heir. So it is the daughter of Filippo Maria Visconti, Maria Bianca Visconti, who's going to marry into the family of Francesco Sforza. And this is going to start the Sforza family tree. From Francesco, the power is going to be transmitted to Galeazzo Maria Sforza, and then at his death to his brother Ludovico il Moro. Ludovico il Moro is the one who is by that time the leader of Milan, and he is marrying into the Este family. He will marry Beatrice d'Este, the sister of Isabella d'Este. When Ludovico dies, he dies in France. It's the time where the French are going to replace him for a while before, and by the way, I'm sorry, he's going to be, before becoming the leader, is Gian Galeazzo, who at his death is going to be succeeded by Ludovico. Maximilian Sforza and Francesco Sforza are going to be put back into the power by the French after the death of Ludovico. I just show you this family tree because it's so interesting. So you go down into the line, and we have a marriage here from the daughter of Gian Galeazzo, Caterina Sforza, into the Giovanni de' Medici family. we go down, they have his son Giovanni d'Aliban de Nere, who is going to marry Maria Salvati, and they're going to be the parents of Cosimo de' Medici, who's going to become the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. He's marrying Eleanor of Toledo. As a child, they have Francesco de' Medici, who is marrying into the Holy Roman Emperor family with the Archduchess Joanna of Austria. And these two die within a year of their marriage after having had the daughter, who is Mary de' Medici, who will become the wife of the King of France, Henry IV. The daughter, one of the daughters of Mary de' Medici, Henrietta Maria, is going to marry the King of England, Charles I of England. They have Charles II of England as a child, and then 10 generations later, try to guess who is going to come. So we have lots of generations behind. They actually relate directly to Diana, Princess of Wales. So just to show you that, in fact, Diana was much more royal than her husband, Charles. On the side here, you have the images of Ludovico il Moro and Maximilian and Francesco Maria. Just to give us an idea of what exists around Milan at that time. One of the most extraordinary monuments just on in Pavia, not far from Milan, is the Certosa. Extraordinary monument. It was supposed to house the remains of Gian Galeazzo Visconti. He had commissioned the lower stories of the building, the whole sculptural program with biblical scenes. This was a Carthusian part of a Carthusian monastery. What was happening too is the continuation of the building of the Milan Cathedral. The cathedral is absolutely enormous. Had some problem with the crossing tower. And so they had made some contest also for the project for that tower. And it's finally Amadeo, the architect Amadeo, who is going to win against Bramante and Leonardo. And it is his Gothic spire that you see there with exterior spiraling staircase, which is going to win because they wanted it to match the Gothic building itself. Don't forget that that whole building is not going to be finished before the 19th century. And it's Napoleon who will force the end of the project. So we have mentioned Bramante. Bramante is one of the most important architects of the time. Was born in 1443, 44, we're not quite sure, in Fermignano as Donato di Angelo di Antonio. Trained as a painter and as an architect, as often they were, he moved to Milan in 1474. He is influenced by Francesco Lojana and Alberti's classicism, and also with Piero della Francesca for his fascination with scientific perspective. He moves to Rome in 1499 and will be actually the first to make the plans for the new St. Peter. We'll see him when we talk about Rome, so we'll see him in 2 different episodes. In 1503, will be engaged by Julius II for the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica. He is also going to build the Tempietto of San Pietro in Montorio on the Janiculum in Rome, and dies in Rome in 1514. He is responsible for the building of the Santa Maria presso San Satiro, which is a very difficult project, by the way. Here is the plan, because you have to understand the story of that church. Actually, what happened is that a madman had attacked the Madonna and Child on the exterior of that small centralized church of San Satiro, and the painting allegedly began to bleed and work miracles. And so the community decided they wanted to expand on the church, but they were limited by the location because it was surrounded by other buildings. And so they started rebuilding the church between 1472 and 82, this under the commission of Galeazzo Maria Sforza. So Bramante, who had just moved from the March region, came and offered a plan. And this is the beautiful church inside, not very large church, but very much testimony to the early Renaissance period. Both architect Amadeo, who had worked on the spire of the cathedral, and Donato Bramante collaborated for the church. It has a kind of a long oratory on the side, and then some chapels, as you've seen on the plan. But what's interesting is the way that connection of the nave and then the beautiful ceiling of the apse that is very reminiscent of the Pazzi Chapel, as you can see. They definitely, Bramante has seen the Pazzi Chapel and has been inspired by it. The collaboration of Amadeo Bramante and Leonardo goes on with another church, which is the Santa Maria delle Grazie, that was begun in 1492. At that time, around 1490, Ludovico works at marrying his niece Bianca Maria to the Emperor Maximilian, because Maximilian had lost his wife Mary of Burgundy in 1482. And this would really ensure the imperial investiture of the leader as a Duke of Milan. So he has this church built, thinking of it to become the mausoleum for himself and his family. It's pretty close to the Castello Sforzesco. And inside we find again very much that inspiration from Albertian, typical of the early Renaissance, with the nave. But Bramante is going to leave it incomplete when leaving to Rome. And again, this is another work by Brunelleschi, the old sacristy, and you can see right away that the inspiration is immediate. And this, either by visiting the location or because it had been drawn and printed, and then these prints were disseminated. There's wonderful worksheets for architects and other artists. And here is by Cristoforo Solari, the tomb of Ludovico Sforza and Beatrice d'Este. Though Ludovico Sforza died in France, he was taken as a prisoner by the French, first in a really nice castle and then moved to another one, but he tried to escape. And they said, if it's that way, that doesn't work. So he was put in a dungeon where he lingered until he died 4 years later. While he is in Milan, Leonardo has approached, of course, the court and Ludovico Sforza at that time. He made the beautiful portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, also called the Lady with an Ermine. The ermine is actually the heraldic animal of Ludovico il Moro in her arms, and she was actually the favorite of Ludovico, and gave birth to a child the same year as he married Beatrice d'Este. She is obviously very charming, and really that portrait gave the reputation to Leonardo as an incredibly talented portrait painter. But a very important commission is the Virgin of the Rocks. And of course, always the same thing. Big problem with Leonardo, because it's going to put him in a legal dispute with the group that commissions it, which are the Franciscan of the San Francesco Grande in Milan. This is where he gets the commission for a virgin with Christ and John the Baptist. As you probably know, there are two versions that are very known of that painting. One happens to be in the Louvre and the other one in the National Gallery in London. This one is the first one. It expresses the theme of the Immaculate Conception, the dogma that affirms that Mary was conceived without original sin. And this is really beautifully presented, where they are in kind of a grotto. And really, Leonardo shows his incredible creativity in the way the spatial arrangement of the figures within the grotto. Also with the beautiful description of different plants. He loved botany. He loved nature, as we know, definitely. The canvas was supposed to decorate something similar to this, what we call an ancona. It's an altarpiece, but very sophisticated altarpiece that would be combined with sculptures as well as paintings. So in these niches here would be two other paintings, and then the central painting within this. The commission was given in 1483, and there was decided, it was decided at that time what was going to be done by the hand of Leonardo and what could be done by his assistant. And obviously the two angels that were on both sides of the painting was agreed upon as made by the assistant of Leonardo. But what happens is that the French come in, and Leonardo finishes the painting, and it's probably, we're not quite sure, but it is quite probable that the painting was given to King Louis XII as a gratitude for the settlement of the suit between the painters and the people that commissioned the work. There was that big suit because he was taking too long to finish it, as typical Leonardo. Some people say it was offered to Maximilian, but how did it end up in the Louvre? We're not quite sure. And it is to replace that beautiful painting that another version was painted a little later, and that's the one that is in London, in the National Gallery. So we see here, as I say, the angel, and we have, in fact, here not Christ. Christ is here facing his mother, and the one that is kneeling and praying to him is the young John the Baptist. Here is a study for the Madonna of the Rock. So obviously he's tilted the face, but this was one of the many studies made by Leonardo. He always prepared his paintings with lots of studies. As you can see, this is the very typical composition of the Still early Renaissance, the pyramidal composition, the head of the Virgin being the center of it, and then coming down to the side with the angel and the children. It is also interesting because it's very much almost the first time that the Virgin is within a natural setting. We already saw that with Fra Filippo Lippi with the Madonna in the forest. The original is now in the Staatliche Museum in Berlin, but a copy is in the famous chapel, the Medici Chapel in Florence, where it used to be surrounded by the adoration of the Magi. So we see that there is that move towards that nature. On the other hand, we have the Virgin of the Rocks, the one in the National Gallery, and we can see the difference in the color scheme, difference in the composition. The addition of the cross held by St. John the Baptist is a later addition. It's a little clumsy, not quite correct. But very interesting to see the Virgin without the child on her laps. A difference in the light. This is more chiaroscuro. It was made a few years later. The angel is also different. It doesn't point at the Virgin, but the head is tilted to here. There was a big discussion to see if which was the first and which was the original. A lot of idea were that it was not painted by Leonardo, but just by his assistant. In a recent cleaning, and I'm going to show you the difference. This is the painting before cleaning. This is the painting after cleaning. You can see how different the colors are, but how the light is much more contrasted. So just a cleaning can really show, and they admitted that most of the brushstrokes were Leonardo's and not his assistant. On the other hand, the two paintings that you see on the side, we rejoin this one at the National Gallery and is now exhibited with it, were painted by the De Predis brothers, most probably. Otherwise, some other assistant to Leonardo. When they examined the painting, by the way, in 2005 with the infrared, the reflectography, they found that there was a portrait behind the painting. But also by looking at the way he built up the painting, was the typical build-up with pentimenti, some repents, as they call, while he was painting. The only known male portrait by Leonardo, it's still not accepted by everybody, is the portrait of a musician. And again, the cleaning really helped, because at first, it was thought to depict Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. But then after cleaning, they found that the sitter was holding a piece of paper with music on. And so they derived the idea that he probably was a musician. La Belle Ferronnière at the Louvre, also known as Portrait of an Unknown Woman. She was probably the daughter of an ironmonger, and they think that she was, at the time, the mistress of Francis I. Later, she was identified as Lucrezia Crivelli, who was a lady in waiting to the Duchess Beatrice of Milan, and who became another of the Duke's mistresses. Beautiful representation. You have that separation with the window cell, the velvety texture of the fabric, very pensive look, typical of Leonardo, the very beautifully designed lips. And then, of course, the Vitruvian Man, sorry. This is a drawing that he made that was actually inspired by the architect Vitruvius, who lived in the 1st century BC and who was known for his multi-volume work entitled De Architectura, so about architecture, and in which he describes the perfect proportion of architecture as well as the human body. And he demonstrates things, and actually the writing that you see on top and the bottom of the Leonardo's sheet here are commenting on the fact that the body of a man can be inscribed into a circle as well as a square. Now, he's changed a few things compared to Vitruvius. These are really interesting works. So I'm going to read to you what is on the upper part. And it says, Vitruvio, architect, puts in his work on architecture that the measurements of man are in nature distributed in this manner, that the palm is 4 fingers, a foot is 4 palms, a cubit is 6 palms, 4 cubits make a man, a pace is 4 cubits, a man is 24 palms, and these measurements are in his building. If you open your legs enough that your head is lowered by 1/14 of your height, and raise your hands enough that your extended fingers touch the line of the top of your head, know that the center of the extended limbs will be the navel, and the space between the legs will be an equilateral triangle. Now, in the second part, he demonstrated that actually the width of your arm when fully extended should be the same as your height. I tried that yesterday and I should have been taller. Interesting. He was working very often with Giacomo Andrea, who was an architect, and Andrea had made the Vitruvian Man prototype earlier than Leonardo, and so we believe that this was inspired by Giacomo Andrea. So before I go on, because we're going to go on with the Last Supper, I think I'm going to give you just a little break. Take not more than 5 minutes. Go and get yourself a cup of coffee, and I see that there are some chats. So let me see what the chats are saying. Okay, the first question is, does the change in the schedule mean the link will be done and sent again, or we will use the same link? Okay, the change in schedule, the link should be the same, just the title will change. As far as the Thursday schedule, it's just the same link, it's just the title will change. If you have any problem with the content, then I'll give some instruction to the school that they reimburse you. It can be set for another one, though I tell you the one on Germany is absolutely beautiful. Other question by the same person, why would they use such a feminine pause? The contrapposto is the pause that was created, if you want, at the time of the classical Greek period, the golden age of classical Greek period, where they showed that compensation of the weight bearing on the straight leg, and then you had a relaxed leg on, the other leg was relaxed. And if you see anybody who's standing most of the time, they are standing in contrapposto. It's not feminine, only if you see them in the nude maybe, but that's a very natural way for people to stand. So it's not purely feminine. It looks very feminine, particularly when it's accentuated the way that Donatello had done. And again, you know, I'm stressing the fact Donatello was gay. And so the fact that he makes his model look a little more feminine makes sense. So the next one, typically, how long would it take Leonardo to finish a painting? Oh, let me put you on, by the way, because I forgot to. Yes. So you can unmute yourself if you have question. Typically, how long would it take Leonardo to finish a painting? It varies. It could take a year. It could take 10 years. And particularly the Virgin with the rocks, he got in such problem that when he left Florence for the second time, it was only with the permission that he was going to Milan to finish the painting. And finally, he didn't come back for another 12 years. So it was as I showed you before, we've already seen 2 paintings he didn't finish, and there are more coming. So that was pretty much his character. He was changed his mind and started doing other things that were of interest to him, and it would put him in a lot of trouble. Anne Mason wants to show her Leonardo, so I assume...
Before my battery runs out, I have to go plug in again.
So,
let's see.
You have to put it in front of you.
Uh-oh.
Oh, okay. No, we don't. Yes.
Here's my Leonardo.
Now, when did you get that?
Oh, a local artist, Randy Slack, did it.
Okay, poor Mona Lisa. Anyway, so from Doreen, I see many of these Renaissance paintings ended up in Russia and Germany. Do you think many of them were stolen by the Nazis? No. They finished there because, don't forget that, for example, in Milan, once the French are kicked out by I should have probably mentioned that before, but the French are going to be kicked out by the Holy Roman Emperor. And so they become the new leaders in Milan. And Milan, the whole region, becomes part of the Holy Roman Empire. So automatically what was there could go back and forth in the Holy Roman Empire. Also, there are works that just, as always, are going to be lost or, dismantled. No painter is recognized all his these centuries. And so you have, it belonged to a certain person, the family extinguishes, and they have to sell it here and there. And it's for who is smart enough to recognize what it is, and it ends up over there. And so the Nazi and the Russians, the Russians have been very smart in buying some pieces at the time of Catherine of Russia. She could recognize what was good, and sometimes they just had access to some pieces that were extraordinary. Now, on the other hand, when the communists took over, they very often didn't care. And so you have people like some of the American collectors who bought a whole series of paintings from Russia at that time. So
yes. I have a question. I have 2 questions. I noticed that in your slides, there were oil on panel, tempera on wood, oil on walnut.
Yes.
And I thought,
when they can recognize the kind of essence of wood, then they mention that it is walnut, which is an unusual thing, by the way, because walnut is not a typical wood used in Italy. Mostly it's going to be poplar, but sometimes they don't know or they don't specify what kind of wood it is. As far as oil and tempera, we're going to see particularly here with Leonardo. Leonardo was always trying to innovate. And so he thinks, oh, this is going to be better. And so he does. And as we'll discuss it at length here with the Last Supper, he made some big mistakes in doing some of the things, because tempera is a water-based and egg-based medium, whereas oil is oil. And so they do react to one another, and sometimes it ends up being a very bad mixture.
But my curiosity is the wood preparation, because the wood absorbs a lot of,
Yeah, but it's well prepared. They put a kind of a gesso under. So before the painter applies the pigment, they will put some layers of gesso.
Oh.
On it, very fine, and they work it out so that it's like mirror-like. It's so fine, and then they apply a base, a color base, and then they go with the fine pigments. Yeah,
makes
but
sense.
Of course, the same for canvas. It absorbs too if it's not prepared. So all these surfaces are going to be prepared before they set the
okay.
pigment. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go on because we still have so much to talk about. So I'm going to mute you all again. Let me see if I can do that. And we'll talk at the end. Okay, so now comes that great work that everybody talks about, that has been the subject of so many books and everything. And I'm talking about the Last Supper. And before I go more into the subject, we'll see in a minute, I want to show you how conservation can change. Though with the Last Supper, because of what Leonardo did of using the tempera and oil on plaster, he painted secco. So it's not a real fresco, it's a fresco secco, as they say. And within 20 years of it being made, it started peeling off. And so it's generation and generation of conservators who tried to resolve the problem. So this is before the last conservation. And the choice was made. The philosophy right now is that whatever is lost is lost. You don't replace what is lost because we're not sure of what was there before. But they also removed all the addition that had been done along the centuries. So here's the result afterwards. So it's better. The colors are, as you can see, you had some change of color there in the mantle of Christ. It becomes more blue, which is typical. The blue is probably one of the most difficult color that turns green because of the mixture of pigments. I'm also bringing you a video, and I hope it's going to work. It shows you, it's going to talk about the whole process, and hopefully, yes. And so listen to that conservator.
La gente che va a vederlo dà delle emozioni di questa pittura, di questo uomo che in quel momento allarga le braccia e dice: chi mi ha tradito?
The Last Supper was painted here 500 years ago for the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, but due to his experimental fresco technique, it started to flake away almost as soon as Leonardo da Vinci had finished it. Now a marathon restoration has attempted to save one of the world's masterpieces from disappearing completely.
Peraltro devo anche dire che avvicinarsi al genio universale di Leonardo costituisce per un restauratore un'esperienza unica, un grande privilegio per me. Lo stato in cui ho trovato Cenacolo era una cosa incomprensibile. Mi chiedevo se quella pittura che io vedevo in quel momento era Leonardo o no. La prima cosa di cui io mi sono preoccupato è di cercare di capire quello che era successo nei tanti anni quando Leonardo aveva dipinto. Si sono avvicendati 6 restauratori e ognuno cambiava per esempio la fisionomia, la caratterizzazione dell'espressione degli apostoli. Il viso del Cristo non era molto diverso. Da Cristo c'è emerso un'umanità, una bellezza. Lei vede l'uomo che lavora, ma vede anche come ha fatto il lavoro con le mani, vede il suono, la musica che lui ha messo nella sua pittura. Era una conquista giornaliera lentissima, un frammento non più grande di così. È per questo che è durato 20 anni.
By stripping away centuries of botched restoration attempts, lines which were crude and inexpressive are now delicate and refined. The mural is by no means perfect, and some critics feel too much paint has been removed.
Lascio a ognuno la loro opinione. Onestamente penso e spero di aver fatto la cosa giusta, poi si vedrà nel tempo. Quando finì ero molto dispiaciuta di abbandonare il dipinto. E così un po' per tutte le opere che si restaurano rimane dentro qualche cosa, dentro di noi. Quel distacco è sempre molto spiacevole, se ne va una parte di lei praticamente.
So it is a miracle that actually the Last Supper survived. In 1943, during an air raid, a bomb exploded in the refectory of the monastery and destroyed the roof and the walls to the right of the Last Supper, literally right down to the foundation. Fortunately, knowing that there were some raids around, you can see that the work of art that was behind this actually was protected by sandbags and survived the catastrophe. The reason is, by the way, these were Allies bombing because the church was close to the Nazi headquarters. And this is now after restoration, the Last Supper within the refectory. So let's look at it the way it has. We have the subject, it's the Last Supper, very traditional for a refectory. This is the moment where Jesus tells the apostle that he will be betrayed, and therefore there is confusion amongst them, except for Judah, who moves to take the bread, as you can see here. He is there are 4 groups linked by gesture. Christ in the center, very calm, and Judas is in the shadow. Again, Leonardo is using that new tool that came in Florence in the early 15th century, is that perspective that makes it so incredibly dramatic. The Christ is, of course, in the center, and I made a drawing to show you how all the lines from the coffered ceiling, from the walls and the doors and the panels, all converge behind the head of Christ. Unfortunately, with the time, a door was pierced in the bottom, so we took away some of the table off. On top, of course, the coat of arms of the dukes. What is extraordinary is we have a continuation of still lifes on top of the table, which would have been much more striking when Leonardo made it than now, because so much has been erased. As I mentioned, the big problem with the Last Supper is the mixture of Leonardo's pigments, where he used both oil and tempera dry on the wall. And that's known, of course, he didn't have that perspective of the 20 years to know that it was going to be in bad condition. And we have the triangle of Christ with the two extended arms. The whole tablecloth is normally decorated with embroideries. So here's a blow up of the image of Christ, and you can see how irritated the apostles are and saying, how can it be that you're going to be betrayed? You have the bread, of course, offering his mystical body, and then the head of Christ with the background of the beautiful landscape. Beside that absolutely extraordinary work, there was that project that was so dear to Leonardo's heart, and this is the horse. This is that huge horse that he wanted to make for Ludovico Sforza. And again, I'm coming back with some little YouTube. It's going to give you
Leonardo da Vinci spent 20 years working on this huge bronze horse statue, a project commissioned in 1482 by the Duke of Milan. But da Vinci never finished his project. Engineers always thought the horse project failed because of casting problems, but now new research shows everything was perfect on da Vinci's end.
The general opinion is that was not feasible, and the reason why it was not completed is that Leonardo was unable to handle the complex process for casting such a huge monument.
To build and cast the horse, Leonardo first made a full-scale model using nails to mark the reference lines that guided him in making a cast with detached parts. The reinforced pieces were put back together to form the negative of the horse's body, which was divided into two halves. At that point, the molds for the head and legs were assembled.
The talent of Leonardo, who invested 20 years of his life in this project, was so good that he had combined understanding from technology with concern from an art project that he wanted to have that very dramatic posture of the horse on ground would have been very complicated for everybody, but apparently not for Leonardo.
Da Vinci tried to cast this huge horse by placing furnaces around the edge of the casting pit. To start, the first section of the horse was lowered into the pit, then the core of the statue was placed inside the first half. Finally, the section was lowered into the pit. Then, once the pit was filled, molten bronze started to fill the molds.
So many innovations, and also small, minor things, because you couldn't see when the bronze had filled the forms. He was using explosive located at the height when the bronze reached that and exploded, giving outside the sign that the form was filled. So many ingenious devices to make possible such an endeavor were conceived by Leonardo.
Da Vinci never finished the horse statue because the Duke of Milan took the bronze for his war with France. The molds were lost forever, and the clay model was used for target practice by invading French soldiers. But Galuzzi hopes his institute in Florence can one day finish Da Vinci's statue in his honor.
It's so important for me that I would very much like to make it come in, and to find a way that we can cast finally the horse that Leonardo would have liked to cast, but he couldn't.
If this 24-foot-high, 70-ton bronze horse statue had been finished in Da Vinci's lifetime, it would have been the biggest horse statue in the entire world. For Discovery News, I'm...
Okay, another video is going to show you the fact that they made the horse, but not in Milan.
We know Leonardo da Vinci as a painter and engineer, but few know he had a grand and unfulfilled vision to create the world's biggest bronze horse. He planned to cast the 80-ton Colossus in one solid piece of bronze, a feat unimaginable at the time. Captivated by his dream, the Duke of Milan allotted bronze for Leonardo, but in 1499, the bronze had to be cast into cannons to defend the city. Leonardo's dream was lost. Then in 1978, Allentown native Charles C. Dent read about Leonardo's lost horse. As a pilot, art collector, and sculptor, he felt a connection to Da Vinci and decided to finish what the great artist had started. With help from Da Vinci scholars, he sculpted an 8-foot clay statue he believed captured the spirit of the original. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to finish the statue before his death in 1994. Dent's passion and persistence inspired others to carry on and fulfill Leonardo's vision. Nina Akamu, a talented figurative sculptor, was hired to complete the project. Unfortunately, when Dent's model was scaled up to full size, it was found to need changes, but the material used in the enlargement could not be practically modified. Using Nina's model, the Talix Art Foundry cast a 15-ton sculpture in 66 sections. As a nod to Charles and Leonardo, she engraved their names inside the eyes of the beast. Today, the finished horse still stands in Milan, Italy, as a tribute to Leonardo da Vinci and a gift of thanks from the American people to the people of Italy for the Italian Renaissance. The beauty and wonder of Leonardo da Vinci's horse is also found in replicas dedicated throughout the United States and around the world.
Okay, so this is interesting. So made here to Milan, sent to Milan. A lot of studies that we find in the different codices. This is part of the Windsor codices, the study for the Sforza monument, and the very large double page of the, the study on how to hold together the model, and then how with all the attachments. It's just an incredible work, because everything had to be invented for just the size. And I want to show you an idea of the scale of what it would have been. We talked about the Colleoni of Verrocchio. This is the size of look at how huge it was. So it's almost double in size from the Colleoni, and close to double from the Marcus Aurelius in Rome. But Leonardo was used for many things, and there are a lot of things we don't see anymore because they were temporary. He was asked to prepare whenever there was a huge event at the court. He was in charge of setting all the entertainment that was incredibly sophisticated, with machineries and so on, to give you the illusion of a ship going by or other things. So these, unfortunately, we can find some in the preparation drawings, but these are very typically just there for a couple of weeks. Part of the decoration he did for the Castello Sforzesco is the decoration of the Sala dell'Asse. Unfortunately, it's been very heavily overpainted. It was very complex because it was mixing the Ludovico's heraldic devices together with Beatrice. And this gives you probably a better idea that enlargement showing the different knots that were a specialty of Beatrice d'Este, that are not only showing the close ties between the spouses, but was also kind of a fashionable decoration. And here what we have is just the feet of Ludovico with the plants, with Maximilian of Austria. And there comes a thing that seems to have been in the actualities not too long ago, is the famous Salvatore Mundi. This is a painting, this is shown in 2006-07 when the painting was cleaned. And this is typically when you have a very old painting, you have all these damages that appear once you clean. You remove all the overpainting. And this is the painting once it was restored by Diane Dwyer Modestini, who is a researcher professor at New York University. The hand, as well as the curls, I just were pretty well preserved and close to their original state. Now, unfortunately, the overcleaning resulted in abrasion of the entire painting, and particularly in the head. So this has been such a debated painting because it has a very long history. The provenance, it's actually the only one that remains to be in a private collection. It may have been painted for Louis XII of France and Anne of Brittany, his wife. Probably commissioned around 1500, that's when the French came to Milan. Seemed to have been, and we don't know how it came there, at James Hamilton's Chelsea Manor in London in the mid-1600s. And when Hamilton participated to the English Civil War, he was executed in 1649, and then his possessions were taken to the Netherlands to be sold. It's recorded in Henrietta Maria possession in 1649, and probably belonged to Charles I prior to that. So when the paintings were sold, they were sold to a creditor in 1651, and then was returned to Charles II after the restoration, and ended up in the Palace of Whitehall in 1666. Was inherited by James II, and then passed, interestingly enough, to James II's mistress, Catherine Sedley, who had an illegitimate daughter with James, and became the third wife of John Sheffield, Duke of Buckingham. It went then to the illegitimate son of the dukes, Sir Charles Herbert Sheffield, and was auctioned in 1763, was sold to George III. It was bought much later on by a British collector, Francis Cook, in 1900, and was at that time attributed to Bernardo Luini, who was a follower of Leonardo. Sold again in auction in 1958 for £45 as a work by Leonardo's pupil, one of Leonardo's pupils, and it remained attributed to him until 2011, and then when the big thing came, it was then discovered, in quotes, by a scholar, and was sold at an auction for, hold on, $450 million on the 15th of November 2017 through Christie's in New York to Prince Baden bin Abdullah. And he was thought to buy it for the Abu Dhabi Department of Culture and Tourism. But in fact, everybody knows now that it was in the name of Mohammed bin Salman, who is the Saudi Arabian crown prince. It was supposed to be exhibited at the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. There is a subsidiary of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, but then it was canceled, and it was apparently seen in the yacht of bin Salman, and apparently now it is somewhere in Switzerland in a vault. So this has been a big story. To just see why it is not still fully accepted is that there are things that don't quite make sense, including that sphere that is so beautifully rendered, but doesn't show any distortion of the drapery behind. And as you know, once you have such a prism, there should be quite a distortion at the back. The shallow focus also is quite interesting. It would correspond to some of the studies that Leonardo was doing on the focus of the eye. The crystalline sphere it represents the spherical Earth at the center of the universe. And this is why we have the Salvator Mundi, the savior of the world. This painting has been, and here is a very interesting view of these really strange eyes, the kind of lack focus, but this could be due to also the overcleaning. And a view of the hand, really beautifully painted. And Leonardo was known to his gorgeous hands. And as you see, this normally, if you have a glass globe, it should have some distortion at the back. Here is one of the pages of the codices showing the interest of Leonardo into the way the eyes is seeing and focusing. His interest was always universal. This painting, we know that one existed, has been very influential on many painters, and I bring you only 3 out of so many that give you an idea of the same type of composition, one by Albrecht Dürer, where he's also holding the sphere. But there you can see kind of a change into the drapery and the color of the drapery. Carpaccio, another one where he puts the hand on top, and then El Greco, Christ, blessing. On his way out of Milan, so Ludovico was taken prisoner in 1500, and at that time everybody, Bramante went to Rome, and Leonardo decided he was going to go back to Florence, but he, instead of going straight to Florence, he went all along the coast. He went through Bologna and Mantua, and in Mantua he met with Isabella d'Este, who was the wife of the Gonzaga, at that time Federico Gonzaga. And she asked him, she knew of him very much and wanted to have her portrait made. He made this chalk drawing that was supposed to be a preparation work for a painting that unfortunately was never made. And this is one of the only portraits, by the way, that we have of Isabella d'Este. Around that same time, he made 2 paintings, and that again are attribution. The 2 different versions of the Madonna of the Yarn Winder. The yarn Winder is here in the hands of baby Jesus. And I can understand why this one has been contested, because I think there is something really wrong with the perspective of the head of the Virgin. But there is a recording about that work in Florence in 1501. And it was apparently done for Florimond Robertet, who was the secretary to King Louis XII of France. So it might have been delivered to the French court in 1507. Here is the other version, which is in a private collection in the US. It shows a difference in the face of the child. And I think a correction in the way the head stands. But behind, there's a lot of Leonardesque features, such as the landscape at the back with that atmospheric perspective, the blue cliffs at the back, and then the winding down river. This version, by the way, has, no, it's the previous version, I'm sorry. This one. No, sorry, previous. Has quite an interesting story because it had been stolen from where it was. In 2003, what is also called a Buccleuch Madonna was stolen from the Drumlanrig Castle in Scotland by two thieves posing as tourists. And they claimed to be the police, and so they went away, left the building with the painting under their arm. It was really interesting because then they wanted to make money out of it. They put a lawyer in charge who was the in-between, and the poor guy was arrested. They found the painting. The guy was in prison for years when he was just an in-between. He was a very famous lawyer at that time, and he was pardoned, but then tried to be compensated, and the judge never accepted it. Here is a study for the Madonna with the Lion Wonder, red choke and silver point, which is very typical of Leonardo. Now the big story is back in Florence. The Medici are out, so that's a big thing. And both Michelangelo and him are asked to make a large fresco for the Sala del Gran Consiglio, the Sala del Cinquecento, that was completed by Vasari later on in 1565. By 1501, the council in Florence was made of 500 members. And so they needed to really enlarge that room to allow such a crowd. So by asking both Michelangelo and Leonardo, who didn't care for one another, they really pitted against one another, probably with the idea that they would, being challenged so much, they would really push their creative limits to the end. Unfortunately, neither one ever finished the painting, and they made some cartoons. Leonardo probably part of the fresco before he left again. So what is interesting is then it stayed that way, and only in 1565, Giorgio Vasari completed with his very own frescoes. It is known, we're sure, that he would never have demolished, if ever there was a fresco by Leonardo, he would never have annihilated what existed. It's known that he built an additional wall with a space in between the old wall and the new one to make his fresco on it. And there is a professor in the university, so this is where they would have been set. So this would have been the Michelangelo, and this was the Leonardo. So Maurice Haccini, who is an engineering professor at the University of California, had the idea that he was sure something existed behind. It gives you a very good idea of the scale of these paintings, by the way. There is a word on that painting that is said, cerca trova, so who's looking for will find. And he thought that maybe that was a word from Vasari that would say that behind that painting at that place would be what was done of the fresco by Leonardo da Vinci. He got that scaffolding put on, and all he wanted is to have a tiny little hole in the place where the painting had already been damaged, and have a little camera that would look at the back to see if the fresco was there. Unfortunately, he had terrible problem to receive the permission by the authorities to do it. And just got in 2007, he got a little green light for further investigation, but it was, the attempts were unsuccessful. to find enough money to do the whole thing. They got a little bit of, they were able to put a little camera, they were able to get some of the pigment that seemed to correspond to the kind of pigment that Leonardo was using at the back, but they were never able to go really and see the other painting. But it was quite exciting. So how do we know part of the fresco of the Battle of Anghiari? All these frescoes were supposed to represent battle won by the Florentine against their enemies, is because before it was hidden by the additional wall, some painters reproduced what Leonardo had done. Of course, Michelangelo was never even set on the wall. And so this is probably the most known detail of the Battle of Anghiari, that was, by the way, finished by Rubens on both sides. And it shows an incredible energy and beautiful composition. I think much more successful than Michelangelo. Among the codices, again, and the papers that Leonardo had are some other studies for the faces. This is in the Budapest museum, and the other one in the Galleria. There are more, but I couldn't show all of them. And so this takes us to Mona Lisa, La Gioconda. Of course, this is the most known painting. This is shown here after its restoration and the removal of the dark varnish that was on top of it. The painting, according to Vasari, was a portrait of Mona Lisa, short Madonna, Mona, who was born in Florence in 1479 and who married in 95 the Marchese del Giocondo, therefore called La Gioconda very often. This is one of the version, that's one of the theories about who the sitter is, though there are numerous ones. We know that Leonardo took the painting with him from Florence to Milan and then later on to France. He had it in his possession when he died. Some say that the portrait had been painted at the wish of Giuliano de' Medici, who was in love with La Gioconda. The painting, as we say, was probably acquired by Francis I from either from Leonardo or from Melzi, who was his executor. And it is recorded very early in the Chateau of Fontainebleau. The Duke of Buckingham, when he came to visit the French court, wanted to buy it, but it was refused. It was then put in exhibition in the Musée Napoleon in 1804, before Napoleon had it in his own room in the Tuileries. And it was admired from the very beginning. It became really the prototype of the Renaissance portrait. The figure of the woman with that beautiful landscape, kind of looks like fictitious landscape, but corresponds to where Leonardo was from, is greatly admired. And it shows all the great qualities of Leonardo's art. Is the magnificent hands, that very enigmatic smile, that's sfumato, where he gives that atmosphere of mystery almost around it. And I'm sorry I put it right away next to it, is that on the Mona Lisa, there are many copies that have been made of the painting, and this seems to be a contemporary copy that was made between 1503, 1515, and is now at the Prado and has been recently cleaned, and shows that it's probably by another hand than the one of Leonardo. Now, that painting has caused so much writing too because of the enigma. Some people see it as a portrait of Leonardo himself, though that has been mostly denied now. Really interesting that in the 19th century, Cesare Maccari shows the scene where Leonardo is painting La Gioconda, entertained by musicians and singers on the side. But it was the subject of a big story when it got stolen. And you see here on the left, it was stolen in 1911. And this is the wall where it was hanging and from where it had disappeared. In the center, you see a piece of the page of the newspaper showing that the La Joconde est retrouvée. So the Gioconda has been found again. And it was found in Italy, in the apartment of Vincenzo Perugia, who was an Italian workman. He actually thought that Napoleon was the one who had stolen the painting, and he wanted it back in Italy. And then you see there on the right the ministers and the director of the museum looking at the painting that has been found again. Now, what is quite interesting that Guillaume Apollinaire, who was a friend of Picasso, was imprisoned under the ground that on the ground that he probably was the one who had stolen the Gioconda. And Pablo Picasso was also accused of being part of the scheme because both of them had participated into previous robberies at the Louvre of a very old Iberic sculpture that had ended up at Picasso. So there was an incredible story around the paintings. And nowadays it's protected with bulletproof plexiglass or glass, and at a distance, so you can't really see it. It's not a very large painting, and it's always surrounded by crowds of Chinese and Japanese. You can't even get there. But let's go on to some more of the works, because we still have many. Extraordinary drawing. That is a preparation drawing for another work, The Star of Bethlehem and Other Plants. Leonardo was very attracted by botany. And that beautiful representation, which is reminiscent very much of some of the works that Dürer have done too on botany, was actually some preparation for the Leda and the Swan. These two drawings, different position of Leda that never turned into paintings, but were preparation also for a painting. With a study for the incredibly sophisticated hairdo of Leda and the plants surrounding her. The story of Leda, of course, is Jupiter transforming himself as a swan to seduce the nymph. Other beautiful drawing, this is the female head, La Scapigliata. And then another charcoal drawing with white chalk heightening of the Madonna in Chime with St. Anne and the young St. John. Baptist is crowned with a laurel wreath. He's wearing a fur garment. Unfortunately, that panel is in really bad shape, and so it has lost a lot of the details. It was turned into a painting, but by one of his pupils. And of course, the Virgin and Child that is at the Louvre, with a beautiful preparatory drawing of the knee of the Virgin who's sitting on the laps of St. Anne. And again, there, imagine the size of St. Anne. If she was to get up, she would be immense. This painting was commissioned by the Servites in Florence. And another painting that is unfinished, as so many by Leonardo. a lot of suggestion by Sigmund Freud, you would see in the painting, looking at the shape of the Virgin's garment in the shape of a vulture. And so it gives right away a psychoanalytical explanation. Of course, Leonardo had had a dream when he was young that he was attacked by a vulture. And so that could have been a reminiscent of his dream. The famous self-portrait of Leonardo that is, again, not admitted by everybody. It is by the hand of Leonardo, but it is difficult for them to believe that in 1510, when he was not even 60, he would look already so aged. We know that his health was not getting better. He had had some small strokes already at that time, but the eyes are so marked, and then his mouth shows that he's lost some of the front teeth. Also makes many people believe that in fact it would be an image of his father and not of himself, his father having died around 1500. Anyway, it has, in the mind of so many, become the absolutely typical self-portrait of Leonardo. We can compare it with some of the other images that exist. This is a retro drawing that attributed to Francesco Melzi, who was the companion of Leonardo and really who took care of him to the end. That shows Leonardo here. This is a portrait that is, you can see here behind, in the background of the Codex on the Flight of Birds, that has been found, that seemed to be a self-portrait also. This is the painting of by Raphael of the School of Athens, where definitely Plato shows the likeness of Leonardo. And this is the plate that Vasari's is showing for the likeness of Leonardo in his lives. And then not too long ago has a painting has come up with a so-called self-portrait, we don't know by whom. And that's a whole story. I'm not going to go into it because I'm running out of time and we still have a few things to see. But you can look at it on my presentation. The last two paintings by Leonardo, this is an attribution also, is the St. John in the Wilderness, where St. John is the wilderness, but by many is also thought to be maybe Bacchus because of some of the attributes of Bacchus that are surrounding it. He's wearing a fur garment and carrying a staff. His left hand is pointing to a spring and he's holding a bunch of grapes, which is interesting because that would be for Bacchus. It looks like this is using the likeness of Salai, who was also one of his last students, who was quite a little devil, because Salai, this is what Salai means, but was with Leonardo until he departed to France. And the very last painting is the St. John the Baptist. St. John the Baptist looking at the observer and with a kind of a strange smile that is very ambiguous and again has been the source of a lot of speculation from the writers, again using the likeness of Salai. He is pointing also at the heavens, of course, for Christ. This is probably the best time to talk a little bit about his pupils. We know of many, but the one that were the most important is Tommaso di Giovanni Massini, known as Zoroaster da Peretola, who was quite an interesting man, was much older than the others and seemed to have worked with Leonardo mostly on the horse in Milan. He was known as a blacksmith and a man that could do about everything. The one in the center, Francesco Melzi, was with Leonardo until he died and inherited all his codices and the paintings that were in the hands of Leonardo at that time. And then Andrea Salai, who was Salai being a nickname because he was such a little devil, and Leonardo has list of things that he did wrong, where inherited the vineyard that Leonardo had in Florence. So these were some of him. This Francesco Melzi, he met in Milan when he came, and Francesco stayed with him, and it's believed that Leonardo treated him as a son. He was there, he helped him write when he became paralyzed, he'd help him a lot in transcribing many things. And as I say, he inherited all the codices that Leonardo was hoping to one day publish. So let me go quickly to the rest because I know I've passed my time. Talking about the codices, all these notebooks were to be published. Unfortunately, he never made it. So they were inherited by Francesco Melzi after Leonardo died. After Melzi's death in 1570, the collection passed to his son, who was a lawyer, Orazio, who at first wasn't interested at all. And then the tutor of Orazio, who was an architect, Lelio Gavardi, took 13 of the manuscript. Sorry, he was just a tutor. 13 of the manuscript to Pisa, and there the architect Giovanni Magenta told Gavardi, you can't steal all this, but was aware of what happened. And then Orazio gave the architect all the manuscripts. And then these were starting to be spread around. They ended up, some of them ended up in the hands of the sculptor Pompeo Leoni, who went to Spain with it when he worked for Philip II. And one of these were the Codex Atlanticus. So we find these codices everywhere. This one of the most important, the Codex Atlanticus, is in the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana in Milan. The largest, it has 11, actually it is not the largest, but it has 1190 pages. Altogether, we have over 6,000 pages of manuscript. It shows a whole series of research on water wheels, Archimedean screws, bridges, giant crossbow, siege defenses, multi-barrel guns. The Codex Arundel is at the British Library. It belonged to the Arundel family. Treats of mostly mechanics and geometry. It was acquired by the Earl of Arundel in Spain in 1630 and ended up in the British Library with the Arundel manuscript, and is now in the British Library, British Museum. The Codex Leicester, and I won't have the time to show you the video, but you can see it yourself, was in the hands of one of the students of Michelangelo, became the possession of Giuseppe Gezi, and then Thomas Cook, the first Earl of Leicester, this is why it has its name, was in the estate until the 20th century, bought by Armand Hammer in 1980. And then the estate was in the estate of Armand Hammer until 94 and was bought by Bill Gates, who still owns it. Bill Gates bought it for, on November 11th, 1994 for $30,802,000, which is the equivalent right now of about $53 million. He actually, this is very much a philosophical treatises, but also with some, as you can see, research on the universe. There's also an explanation on fossils, on plate tectonics, movement of the water, luminosity of the moon, etc. And he has now the whole codex is on CD. Codex Windsor, 606 pages, is part of the Royal Collection in Windsor. Mostly the anatomy. This is all the result of all the dissections that Leonardo had done not only in Florence, but also in Rome, and has been very instrumental in advancing anatomy for in the medical studies, showing a coit between a man and a woman and the way it works. And then here the beautiful study of a fetus in the womb. Also, Cannon Foundry. Codex Trivulzianus in the Sforza Castle in Milan. Studies of military and religious architecture. This one is one of the oldest of the series. And showing, of course, I didn't stress that, but the mirror writing of Leonardo, who was a lefty and who was writing in mirror fashion so that people couldn't read it. And this is in the Biblioteca Reale. This is kind of the weapons devised by Leonardo, very dangerous, as you can see. Codex Forster in the Victoria and Albert Museum, mostly on Euclidean geometry. Manuscript, more than 2,500 pages of the Paris manuscript. This is just one example of how they held in what they call notebooks. And this one shows it's the military engineering, geometry, painting, perspective, water and mechanics, light and shade, which where Leonardo was instrumental too, is to explain how light and shade work. And the Codex Madrid, mostly the pages on the Sforza document. Mechanics, statics, geometry. Also grammar books, interestingly enough. Codex Ashburnham, also in the Bibliothèque of Nationale de l'Institut de France, made in 2 volumes, was really interesting. It was taken by the, it was in Paris, and then when the Allied troops occupied Paris in 1815, they wanted to recover what Napoleon had stolen, and so they tried to get it, but the Austrian delegate only found the Codex Atlanticus and didn't find this one. And there's even some images made of Napoleon showing, you know, bring that all day, and then the British, all the pieces Napoleon had taken back to England or to Austria, with the Pope looking on the top. Codex on the Flying of Birds, this is the last one. It's at the Biblioteca Reale of Turin, which of course is the extraordinary study on how birds fly. So very quickly, and also a map in 8 rouleaux, a triangle, showing what the world looked like at that time. Sorry, I have to go. And this is the explanation how you make these intersection of 3 circles. In 1517, Leonardo traveled from Milan to France. That was the biggest trip he had ever made. And he was given the Chateau de Clos-Lucé or Chateau de Cloux next to the Chateau of Amboise by Francis I, who was absolutely crazy about him. He couldn't paint anymore, but he had all that knowledge, and Francis would come and sit with him or invite him in his chateau and listen forever to what Leonardo was doing. So here's the chateau the way it is now. It's larger now than it was when Leonardo was, the courtyard. And you can imagine, this is where Leonardo died. This was the bedroom where he died. He had with him these three paintings, Mona Lisa, the John the Baptist, and the Mary, St. Anne, and Jesus. This is the room of Marguerite de Navarre, who was the sister, great, interesting woman, sister of Francis I. And then within the garden, they have reproduced some of the projects of Leonardo, so you can see that now. As usual, I'm a little long, but hope that next time you come, we're going to look at Rome, reestablishing papal power, and this is going to be mostly some of the architecture that was done at the beginning of the 16th century, but also how at the end of the 15th century, they are going to start decorating the Sistine Chapel before Michelangelo's ceiling. So I'm going to stop the recording, and now